Elias had lived inside the castle grounds for almost 3 years, yet he still felt like a visitor who had accidentally wandered into the life of nobility. Every morning he swept the courtyard, carried supplies, and helped the cooks bring water to the kitchen. Most people barely noticed him, not because they were unkind, but because he blended into the busy rhythm of castle life, quiet, careful, and always doing his work without complaint. He never expected to become involved with the knights, especially with someone like Dame Rowan. She was one of the strongest warriors in the kingdom, admired by everyone. People said she had traveled through storms, climbed mountains, and led entire patrols without ever showing fear. To Elias, she seemed like someone carved from stone, solid, distant, and always focused on her duty. That was why the moment she called his name, everything in his world paused. Elias had been stacking crates near the workshop door when he heard the soft but unmistakable sound of metal boots behind him. He turned and saw Dame Rowan standing there, tall and confident, wearing her full armor. The silver plates were covered in dried mud and dust. Even though she looked tired from a long patrol, her posture was still straight. For a second, Elias wondered if she was calling someone else. Knights did not speak to him unless they needed directions or a quick message delivered, but she repeated his name, clearly this time, and he felt his stomach twist with nervous surprise. Double quotes. "Yes, Dame Rowan?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She lifted her helmet from under her arm and rested it against her hip. Her hair was tied back, a few loose strands brushing her cheek. Her eyes, sharp and observant, studied him in a way that made him straighten his shoulders. "The blacksmith is handling repairs for the entire patrol," she said. "He won't be able to look at my armor until tomorrow evening, but I need it cleaned and inspected today. I was told you sometimes help in the workshop." Elias nodded quickly. I do, when they need extra hands." She held out the bundle of metal plates attached to the leather straps. Elias stepped forward and carefully took the heavy pieces from her. The sudden weight nearly made him stumble, and he hoped she didn't notice. Rowan's armor was not just equipment, it was a reminder of her duty, her strength, and everything she represented. Holding it felt like being trusted with something important. "If it's too much, I can wait," Rowan said, her voice still calm but softer than before. "No, I can do it," Elias replied immediately. "I'll do my best." Rowan nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "Good. I'll return in a few hours." With that, she turned and walked away. Elias watched her leave, still stunned. Her steps were slow today, not weak, just tired from hours of travel. Even so, she continued with the same steady rhythm that everyone respected her for. Once she disappeared down the hallway, Elias took a deep breath and carried the armor inside the workshop. The room smelled of oil, metal, and warm stone. Sunlight shone through the small window near the workbench, catching the dust in the air. Tools hung neatly on the wall: hammers, brushes, polished cloths, and small instruments used to adjust metal plates. He placed the armor gently on the table and stared at it. Up close he saw every detail: scratches from branches, tiny dents, bits of dried mud, and faint marks where straps had rubbed against the plates. It wasn't damaged, but it looked tired, just like its owner. Elias touched the surface with the tip of his finger. It felt cold at first, but under it, he could imagine the warmth of Rowan's strength and determination. He wondered how many long journeys she had taken while wearing this armor. How many times had it protected her? How many days had she stood in the sun, the rain, or the wind, trusting these metal plates to support her? And now she trusted him to take care of it. He rolled up his sleeves and gathered the cleaning tools. First, he filled a small basin with warm water and mixed it with a mild soap used specifically for metal. Then he dipped a soft cloth into it and began wiping the plates carefully. The mud softened under the warmth and slowly washed away, revealing the silver color beneath. Elias worked gently, almost respectfully. Every time he polished a section, he imagined Rowan relying on that very piece during her travels. He found himself wondering what she thought about when she rode out each morning. Did she feel lonely? Did she feel proud? Did she ever worry? The armor didn't answer, of course, but working on it felt like listening to a story one told through marks and scratches. Minutes turned into hours. Elias moved from cleaning to drying, then to polishing. He checked every strap to make sure it wasn't torn or stretched. He examined every plate to see if it needed tightening. Even though he wasn't a full blacksmith, he had learned enough from watching and helping to understand the basics. As he worked, the workshop grew quiet. The usual clanging and footsteps from other workers faded as people finished their tasks for the afternoon. Soon, only the soft sound of Elias' careful movements filled the room. He didn't notice when someone appeared at the doorway. Dame Rowan stood there silently, still dressed in the rest of her armor. Her helmet was tucked under her arm again. She leaned slightly against the doorframe, watching Elias work. He didn't see her because he was too focused on getting a tiny corner of the shoulder plate polished to a perfect shine. He hummed softly to himself, something he never did when others were around. But he felt comfortable here, surrounded by tools and sunlight. Rowan's expression was unreadable, but it wasn't cold. Her eyes softened as she watched Elias treat her armor with a level of care she rarely saw, even among trained smiths. He wasn't just cleaning, he was paying attention to every detail, as if he understood that the armor mattered to her beyond its practical use. After a minute, she quietly stepped back into the hallway. She didn't want to interrupt him, and she didn't want him to know she had been watching. Something about the peaceful look on his face made her leave without a word. Elias continued working until he was finally satisfied. The armor shone brightly, reflecting the afternoon light. It looked almost new, not because the original beauty had been restored, but because someone had taken the time to care for it with patience and sincerity. He stepped back, wiped his forehead, and felt a sense of pride rising in his chest. He hoped Rowan would be pleased. He wasn't trying to impress her, but he wanted to show respect for everything she did. When he finally left the workshop to bring the armor back to its storage stand, he didn't know that Rowan had already seen him in a moment he didn't expect anyone to witness. And he certainly didn't know that his simple act of cleaning would become the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. At that moment, he was just happy he hadn't dropped the armor. After the morning bustle in the courtyard had quieted, Elias returned to the workshop. The sunlight streamed through the small windows, casting golden patterns on the stone floor. He arranged his tools neatly, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. He had never spent so much time on a single set of armor, and though he had cleaned other equipment before, this felt different. Somehow, polishing Dame Rowan's armor was not just about metal, it was about her. He didn't realize it at first. Elias only thought he was doing his job carefully, making sure every strap and plate was perfect. But as he worked, he noticed himself pausing at scratches and dents, wondering what had caused them. He imagined her walking through muddy fields, climbing rocky paths, or standing under heavy rain. Each mark seemed to tell a story. Each dent seemed to carry a memory of courage or endurance. The workshop was quiet except for the gentle sound of water and the soft swish of his cloth on metal. Outside, birds chirped in the garden, and somewhere in the castle a bell chimed for noon. The calm made Elias think more than he usually did. He thought about his own life, the routines he had grown used to, and how small his days often felt compared to the world of knights and battles. Cleaning the armor made him feel connected to something bigger, something meaningful. As he scrubbed it, polished, and inspected the metal, he began noticing little details he hadn't before. The leather straps were strong but softened from use. Some of the bolts and hinges had small scratches, probably from years of travel. The little imperfections didn't make the armor look weaker. They made it more real, more alive. Elias realized that just like people, armor carries its own story. And Dame Rowan's story was one of strength, resilience, and determination. Hours passed quickly. He lost track of time. So focused was he on making the armor perfect. Every now and then, he would stop and wipe the sweat from his brow, glance out the window, and feel a quiet happiness at being able to do something so meaningful. The work was hard, but it gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't expected to find in the workshop. Elias was so absorbed that he didn't hear the soft steps approaching. Dame Rowan had returned earlier than he expected. She had walked through the castle halls quietly, not wanting to announce her presence. She leaned against the doorway, her arms crossed, and watched him work. Her expression was unreadable at first. She didn't speak, didn't move. She just observed. Elias didn't notice her. He hummed softly as he buffed a shoulder plate, completely focused. But from where she stood, Rowan could see the care he put into every motion. He wasn't just cleaning. He was paying attention to every detail, noticing the worn edges and the tiny scratches. Every move was gentle, respectful, and deliberate. Rohan felt a strange warmth in her chest. She had never seen anyone treat her armor this way. People cleaned it before, of course, and blacksmiths repaired it, but none had ever given it this level of attention. Elias seemed to understand something deeper, that the armor was more than metal. It was part of her, a reflection of her life and her journeys. After a few minutes, she quietly turned and left the doorway. She did not want to disturb him. She did not want him to know she had been watching. But the sight stayed with her and she couldn't help smiling slightly. There was a softness in his concentration that made her heart feel light. It was a feeling she rarely allowed herself to notice. Inside, Elias continued his work, unaware of her presence. He was methodical, almost meditative. He cleaned each piece of armor in a certain order, first the chest plate, then the shoulder guards, the gauntlets, and finally, the greaves. Each piece received the same careful attention. He adjusted the straps, checked the buckles, and polished every surface until it gleamed while he worked. He thought about what it meant to serve someone like Rowan. She was brave, confident, and fearless, but also human. The armor had protected her, yes, but it also carried her burdens, and now, he was part of that story, even in a small way. The thought gave him a strange mix of pride and nervousness. He paused for a moment and leaned back, looking at the nearly finished armor. It shone in the sunlight, reflecting the soft golden glow of the afternoon. It looked almost like new, but Elias knew it was better than new. It had character, history, and care. He felt a sense of accomplishment swell in his chest. He had done something meaningful, something beyond the ordinary routine of sweeping floors or carrying supplies. Then, he heard a quiet step behind him. Elias turned quickly, expecting one of the other servants, but it was Rowan. She had come back without announcement. She stood silently for a moment, holding her helmet under one arm, her gaze fixed on the armor. Elias froze, unsure what to do or say. "Your work. It's remarkable," she finally said, her voice calm but with an edge of surprise. She stepped closer, examining the armor more carefully than he had. I didn't expect anyone to take such care with it. Elias felt his cheeks warm. I just wanted it to be right, he stammered. It's your armor. It deserves it. Rohan studied him for a long moment. There was no judgment in her eyes, only something softer. Gratitude, perhaps. Or maybe admiration. Elias wasn't sure, and the intensity of her gaze made his heart race. You've done more than I imagined, she said quietly. Thank you. Elias swallowed. He had never been thanked like this before. Most people didn't notice his work, let alone acknowledge it with such sincerity. I'm glad you're happy with it, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Rowan nodded, still studying him. I can see that you understand more than just the metal. You see the person who wears it. Elias didn't know what to say. He had never considered that cleaning armor could be interpreted as seeing someone's story, their strength, or their life. But somehow, that was exactly what she meant. After a few more quiet moments, Rowan turned and left. She didn't speak again, but she gave him a small, almost invisible native sign of approval, respect, and perhaps something else Elias couldn't quite name. He watched her leave, feeling a strange warmth inside, a mixture of pride and nervousness. For the rest of the afternoon, Elias couldn't focus on anything else. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind. Her eyes had lingered on him longer than expected. She had spoken softly, with sincerity, and for some reason it made him feel important. He had always been small, unnoticed, a part of the background, but for a few moments he felt seen, truly seen. The hours passed, and the sunlight began to fade. Elias carefully put the armor back on its stand. He stepped back and admired it one last time. It looked polished, protected, and cared for. More importantly, it carried a part of him now, a small piece of his effort, attention, and respect. As he cleaned up the tools and swept the floor, Elias thought about Rowan's words. You see the person who wears it. He wondered what it meant to be truly seen by someone like her. It wasn't just about recognition or praise. It was about understanding, respect, and perhaps trust. Elias realized that this simple task, cleaning armor, had become something more. It was a connection between two people. One quiet and unassuming, the other strong and respected. And though neither of them knew it yet, this moment in the quiet workshop would be remembered. It would be the beginning of a bond neither expected, formed in silence, care, and quiet attention. By evening, Elias left the workshop, tired but satisfied. He walked through the castle halls, the fading sunlight casting long shadows on the stone walls. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond his daily chores. He had done something meaningful, something that mattered, something that, in its own quiet way, had changed everything. And somewhere in the castle, Dame Rowan thought about him too without fully realizing why. The next morning, the castle was alive with activity. Servants bustled through the hallways, bringing supplies to the kitchens, and the knights were preparing for their daily routines. The clatter of boots on stone floors and the occasional laugh of a messenger filled the air. Yet, amid all the noise, Elias felt a strange calm. He had completed cleaning Dame Rowan's armor yesterday, but he could not shake the memory of her gaze, the way she had looked at him in the workshop. He pushed aside the nervous thoughts and focused on his usual chores. He swept the courtyard, organized the supplies, and carried water from the fountain to the kitchens. Each task was familiar, each motion practiced. Yet today, every step felt heavier with anticipation. He knew that Rowan would soon come to see her armor, and he wondered how would she react. Would she even notice the effort he had put in? Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Finally, a familiar sound echoed down the corridor, the steady, confident steps of Dame Rowan. Elias stopped what he was doing and straightened immediately, brushing the sweat from his brow. He held his hands together, suddenly aware of how clumsy he might appear. Rowan entered the workshop without her helmet, carrying her gloves in one hand. She had changed into her lighter travel attire for the day, but the presence she carried remained commanding. Elias felt his chest tighten. He was used to seeing her in armor, a symbol of strength and authority, but seeing her like this human, approachable, yet still full of confidence made his heart race. He stepped forward and gestured to the armor. It's ready, he said quietly. Rowan's eyes widened slightly as she glanced at the polished plates, gleaming in the morning light. She slowly moved closer, examining the metal carefully. The sunlight reflected off the silver surfaces, making the scratches and dents seem almost like marks of honor rather than damage. Elias held his breath, watching her reactions. This looks amazing, Rowan said softly, almost in disbelief. I didn't expect anyone to take this much care with it. Elias felt a warmth spread across his face. I just wanted to make sure it was perfect, he replied. It's your armor. It matters. Rohan studied him for a moment, her gaze steady and intense. She reached out and touched one of the shoulder plates lightly, almost as if testing its shine. You've gone beyond what I imagined, she said. Every detail. You didn't miss anything. Elias felt a nervous thrill. He had never been praised like this, not in his life. Most people simply took his work for granted, but Rowan's words were different. They carried sincerity and attention, he realized. Suddenly, that this simple act, cleaning armor, had created a moment of connection between them. Rowan stepped closer, examining the straps and buckles. She adjusted a few gently, almost automatic. "It's like it's brand new," she whispered. "But also, it still feels like me. You didn't just polish it to understood it." Elias swallowed. He hadn't thought about it that way. He had only wanted to do a good job, to treat the armor with care. But somehow, in her eyes, it seemed like he had given more. He had given attention, thoughtfulness, and perhaps even respect for her strength and history. I just wanted it to be right," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "I didn't mean anything else." Rowan smiled faintly, a soft, almost invisible curve of her lips. "I can see that," she said, "but it matters more than you think. It's not just the armor, it's what it represents, and you treated it with respect, as if you understand me." Elias felt a mixture of pride and surprise. He had never imagined that such a simple task could carry so much meaning. Cleaning armor had never felt like a connection before, but now he understood. Somehow, the care he had put into each movement, each polish, and each adjustment had conveyed something deeper. It had been noticed. It had mattered. Rowan's gaze lingered on him, and for a moment Elias felt as if time had slowed. The sounds of the workshop, the distant voices, the clatter of tools faded into the background. All that existed was the two of them, and the quiet understanding between them. He felt exposed, in a way yet safe. Her eyes were not judging. They were acknowledging, recognizing, and perhaps appreciating something he hadn't even realized he had offered. "You know," Rowan said softly, breaking the quiet, "few people notice these things. Most see the metal, the polish, the shine, but not the effort, not the thought behind it. You see more than most." Elias shook his head, feeling embarrassed. I didn't mean to," he stammered. "I was just doing my job." Rowan chuckled lightly, a sound that was rare and gentle. "That's the point," she said. "You did more than your job. You saw the story behind it, and that matters more than you know." He felt his heart race at her words. For the first time, someone had acknowledged him for something that went beyond simple labor. He was not just a helper in the castle, not just another background face. He was someone who could be noticed, someone who could be appreciated for attention, care, and thoughtfulness. Rowan continued examining the armor, moving slowly from one piece to another. Elias watched her, feeling a mix of nervousness and admiration. She didn't speak much, but her presence filled the room. Her hands brushed over the metal, checking straps, touching small scratches, and adjusting buckles. She treated it as if each piece had its own personality, its own story. "You made it better," she finally said, turning to him. "Not just clean, not just polished, but better it feels. Cared for." Elias blinked. "I'm glad," he said, almost unsure how to respond. He hadn't expected this level of attention, this deep connection over something as simple as cleaning armor. Rowan's eyes softened, a look he had never seen before. There was gratitude, yes, but something more, something tender, quiet, and unspoken. Elias felt as if she had just handed him a silent message he wasn't supposed to interpret fully, but the feeling lingered in the air. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rowan just looked at him, and he looked at her, both aware of the unusual weight of the moment. It was not awkward, but it was charged with something neither could yet define. Elias felt the strange thrill of being recognized for who he was, not just what he could do. Finally, Rowan straightened and gave him a small nod. "Thank you," she said simply. She placed her helmet under her arm and walked toward the door. But she paused, looking back once, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him catch his breath. Elias watched her leave, feeling a mixture of pride, nervousness, and wonder. He had only cleaned her armor, yet her look had made him feel as if he had done something extraordinary. Her acknowledgement was not just about the work, it was about connection, understanding, and respect. And for Elias, that was more powerful than anything he had ever experienced after she left. He remained in the workshop, staring at the polished armor. It gleamed in the morning light, shining not just with metal polish but with the memory of the moment they had shared. He realized that something small could carry immense meaning, that care and attention could speak louder than words, and that a simple act could connect to very different lives. As he cleaned up the tools and prepared to leave, Elias felt a quiet sense of purpose. He had done more than clean armor. He had touched a part of someone else's life, had been recognized in return, and had experienced a moment that would stay with him forever. Walking through the castle halls, he replayed the events over and over in his mind. The look in Rowan's eyes, her words, her soft smile, they all stayed with him. It was a moment of understanding and connection, a rare and precious gift. And though he didn't know what would come next, he understood that something had changed for the first time. Elias felt that small acts of care could create real bonds, that simple attention could be noticed and valued. And somewhere he knew Dame Rowan was thinking of him too, carrying a memory of the moment that was just as meaningful as his own. After the events of the previous day, life in the castle seemed to continue as usual. But for Elias, nothing felt normal anymore. Every step he took in the hallways, every sound of boots echoing on stone, reminded him of Dame Rowan's gaze. He couldn't forget the way she had looked at him, the way her eyes had softened as she studied the polished armor. Even though it had been a small, simple task, it had left a lasting impression, not only on him but, he suspected, on her as well. Elias tried to focus on his chores, sweeping the courtyard, organizing supplies, and assisting the kitchen staff, but he found his mind drifting constantly back to the workshop. He remembered the quiet morning, the sunlight streaming through the window, and the intensity of Rowan's gaze. That moment replayed over and over, almost like a scene from a storybook, each time making his heart beat a little faster. The castle, however, seemed oblivious to the quiet shift happening between them. Knights trained in the yard, clanking armor and practicing sword moves, while messengers delivered letters and announcements. Servants moved quickly from one task to another, chatting quietly but purposefully. Everyone was busy. And yet, for Elias, the world seemed smaller, focused entirely on the quiet connection that had formed between him and Rowan. By mid, whispers had begun to circulate among the knights. It started innocently enough. One of them had noticed Rowan lingering near the workshop more than usual. Another mentioned how she smiled faintly when Elias brought her armor in the morning. Soon, quiet jokes began to spread. Why is Rowan looking at the castle assistant that way? Or has the stable hand charmed her yet? Elias was unaware at first. He tried to ignore the whispers, focusing on his tasks, but the subtle glances and stifled laughter did not go unnoticed. Knights he had never spoken to now nodded politely, sometimes with knowing smiles. Even the other servants began to give him extra space or a curious glance, as if the castle itself had shifted its attention toward him. Rowan, meanwhile, it seemed unaware of the growing rumors, or perhaps she chose to ignore them. She continued her routines, visiting the workshop quietly to check her armor, sometimes asking Elias a brief question about its condition. Each visit was short, professional on the surface, but there was a subtle warmth in her voice, a softness in her tone that made Elias's chest tighten every time. One afternoon, as Elias polished some smaller tools near the workshop window, Rowan returned again. She carried a small satchel with minor repairs and adjustments she wanted made to the armor. She placed it carefully on the workbench and glanced at Elias. "You've done such a good job," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you properly." Elias felt his face grow warm. "You don't need to," he replied, unsure why his voice shook slightly. "I'm just glad it's how you want it." Rowan studied him for a moment, her eyes lingering on his careful movements. "No," she said softly. "You did more than I could have expected. You've shown care, attention, respect, and that matters." For Elias, the words were almost overwhelming. He had always thought of himself as invisible, unnoticed. Yet here was Rowan, a person admired by everyone, acknowledging him for something so simple yet so deeply meaningful. It was a strange, almost dizzying feeling, gratifying, humbling, and nerve-wracking all at once. Days passed like this. Each time Rowan came to check her armor, Elias felt the familiar mix of pride and nervousness. He worked with more care than ever before, polishing each plate, tightening straps, and adjusting buckles with meticulous attention. Every glance from Rowan seemed to carry unspoken words: gratitude, admiration, perhaps even something warmer. The castle began to take notice more clearly. Knights would sometimes pause when Elias walked by, exchanging quick knowing looks. "It's the stable hand," one whispered. "He's the one who polished Rowan's armor perfectly." Servants, too, seemed to treat him differently. Some offered small compliments or curious smiles. Others whispered stories they had heard from the knights. Elias tried to ignore it, but the attention made him sad. He had never been in the center of such quiet curiosity before. Rowan, however, remained a constant. She did not comment on the rumors, nor did she seem to let them affect her interactions with him. She continued to treat him with the same subtle warmth, asking questions about the armor, sometimes giving advice on minor adjustments, or simply observing him as he worked. The small moments of connection became the highlight of Elisa's days. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Rowan lingered longer than usual. She watched him adjust a small buckle on her gauntlet, her eyes soft and thoughtful. "You know," she said quietly, "few people notice these details. Most rush through, thinking only of the shine or the polish. But you notice everything." Elias looked up, startled. I try," he said humbly. "I just want it to be right." Rowan smiled faintly, a gentle, almost shy expression that Elias had never seen before. "It's more than right," she said. "It's perfect, and it shows you care. That's rare." For a moment, they both fell silent, listening to the distant sounds of the castle, the clanging of swords in the yard, the soft murmur of voices in the hallways, and the quiet rustle of leaves outside the window. In that moment, it felt as if the world had shrunk, leaving only the two of them in the workshop. Elias felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, nervousness, and a deep, quiet happiness. He realized that something had changed between them. It wasn't just about armor or work, it was about recognition, connection, and trust. Rowan had seen him, truly seen him, and in return he had begun to notice her beyond her armor, beyond her strength, and beyond her reputation. As the days turned into a week, the bond between them grew quietly. It was not spoken loudly, nor did it need to be. Small gestures, the way Rowan would pause to watch him work, The way Elias would anticipate her needs with the armor created a rhythm, a silent understanding. It was a bond formed through attention, care, and shared moments of quiet connection. Rumors continued in the castle, but they no longer worried Elias. He had learned something important. The approval and attention of others mattered far less than the quiet recognition from someone who truly understood and appreciated him. Rowan's subtle warmth and acknowledgement had become a guiding light, a source of confidence he had never known. One evening, as the sun set and the castle grew quiet, Rowan approached the workshop for the last time that day. She held her gauntlets and a small piece of armor she wanted adjusted. "I have a few small things," she said softly, "but I trust you to handle them." Elias nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of nervousness and pride. "Of course," he said, taking the pieces carefully. Rowan studied him for a moment, her eyes meeting his with a depth that made him catch his breath. "Thank you," she said simply, "not just for the work, but for seeing me." Elias felt a warmth spread through his chest. "It's my honor," he said quietly, almost without thinking. For a long moment they stood in silence, the quiet of the workshop surrounding them. Then, without another word, Rowan turned and left, leaving Elias with the polished armor and a heart full of quiet joy. He realized, in that moment, that something had shifted irreversibly. The bond between them was no longer just about tasks or duties. It was about understanding, respect, and recognition. And though no words of romance had been spoken, both of them felt a connection that went deeper than either had expected. Elias cleaned the remaining tools and stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing his face. He looked back at the workshop and thought of Rowan, and he felt a quiet certainty. Something important had begun here, something that would continue to grow slowly, quietly, and meaningfully. And somewhere in the castle, Dame Rowan carried the same thought, the memory of a small act that had become something far greater than either could have imagined. The days passed slowly, each one carrying the same rhythm that had grown familiar to Elias. He moved through the castle with a quiet purpose, performing his chores with care and attention, yet each task felt different now. There was a subtle brightness in his steps, a warmth in his heart, born from moments he could hardly forget, the moments with Dame Rowan, watching her, working for her, and feeling, somehow, seen. It had been nearly 2 weeks since he first polished her armor, and the small routine they had developed continued. Rowan would come to the workshop to check her gear, and Elias would carefully adjust, clean, and polish, each movement deliberate, each detail attended to. Their connection had grown quietly, a rhythm of small gestures, shared glances, and subtle words of appreciation. The castle seemed to hum around them, oblivious to the bond forming in its quiet corners. Knights trained in the yard, their swords clanging against shields. Servants moved swiftly through hallways, their baskets and trays balanced with practiced precision. Yet, in the workshop, the world slowed. In that room, there were no distractions, no judgment, no noise, only Elias, Rowan, and the polished armor that had become a symbol of care and attention. One afternoon, Rohan returned with a small, minor repair to a gauntlet. She placed it gently on the workbench and looked at Elias with a calm intensity that made him pause. "I have a favor to ask," she said softly, "but it's not about the armor." Elias blinked, unsure what she meant. "Of course," he replied carefully, "whatever you need." Rowan hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I want you to come with me to the training yard tomorrow," she said. "Not to fight, of course, but to watch and assist. I trust you, and I would like your advice on minor adjustments to my armor while I practice." Elias's heart raced. To be asked to accompany her, not simply to work in the shadows, but to be present as someone she trusted, was more than he could have imagined. "I would be honored," he said, almost breathless. Rowan nodded, satisfied, and for a moment, the silence was comforting. She glanced around the workshop, then back at him. "I appreciate your care," she said quietly, "more than you realize." That evening, Elias found it hard to sleep. He replayed the day in his mind, thinking of Rowan's smile, her words, the subtle warmth in her gaze. He felt a nervous excitement for the next day, but also a quiet pride. He realized that something had changed, not just in their relationship, but in how he saw himself. He was no longer invisible. He was noticed, appreciated, and trusted. The following morning, Elias arrived at the training yard with his tools and polishing cloths. The sun shone brightly, casting long shadows across the grass. Rowan stood at the center, her armor gleaming, her posture confident. She glanced at him briefly, a soft smile on her lips. Before raising her practice sword and beginning her drills, Elias moved quietly to the side, ready to assist. He polished and adjusted her armor as she worked, making small tweaks here and there. Each time she stopped, she glanced at him, nodding subtly in approval. He noticed the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, the small gestures of trust and acknowledgement that had become their unspoken language. As the morning turned to afternoon, they continued in this quiet rhythm. Rowan practiced, and Elias cared for her armor, each movement careful, thoughtful, and deliberate. It was not a grand event, nor was it filled with excitement or danger, but it carried a weight far deeper. Each shared moment strengthened their bond, each glance and subtle smile carrying meaning that words could not express. After a particularly long practice, Rowan lowered her sword and rested her hands on her hips. She glanced at Elias, her eyes shining with quiet admiration. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for your help today, but for everything. For your care, your attention, your thoughtfulness. It matters more than you know." Elias felt a warmth in his chest, a mix of pride, happiness, and humility. "It's my honor," he said quietly. "I only want to help." Rowan studied him for a long moment. Her expression softened further, and for a brief instant, Elias thought he saw a flicker of something deeper: gratitude, trust, perhaps even affection. She turned slightly, adjusting a strap on her gauntlet, then smiled faintly. "You've changed things," she said. "Not just the armor, but the way I see someone caring for another person. You've reminded me that attention, patience, and respect mean more than words." Elias blinked, almost stunned. He had never imagined that cleaning and caring for armor could have such a profound effect. I didn't know it mattered," he said softly. "It does," Rowan said simply. "More than you think. And it matters to me." For a moment they stood in silence, the soft breeze rustling the leaves in the training yard, the distant sounds of the castle fading into quiet. In that moment, Elias felt a deep sense of connection, a bond that went beyond work or duty. It was a bond built on care, attention, and understanding, a bond neither of them had expected, yet one that felt natural and right. Days turned into weeks, and their routine continued. Elias polished and adjusted, Rowan practiced and nodded in approval, and the quiet understanding between them grew. The castle buzzed around them, full of activity. But within the workshop and the training yard, their world was small and focused, defined by mutual respect and care. Elias began to notice subtle changes in himself as well. He walked with more confidence, spoke with more assurance, and carried himself differently. The quiet acknowledgement from Rowan, the trust she placed in him, and the small gestures of appreciation had given him a new sense of purpose. He was no longer invisible, no longer just a background figure. He was someone who mattered, someone who could be seen and appreciated for thoughtfulness, care, and attention. Rowan, too, seemed changed. She trusted him more, spoke to him more often, and allowed him into her world in ways she had never done with anyone else. Their bond remained quiet, unspoken, yet profound. Each glance, each small word, and each act of care strengthened it, weaving a connection that neither could ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the castle walls, Rowan approached the workshop for the last time that day. She carried a small piece of armor that needed adjustment. Elias welcomed her with a soft smile and carefully took the piece, examining it before making the necessary tweaks. Rowan watched him for a moment, her expression calm and thoughtful. "You've made a difference," she said softly. "Not just with my armor, but with me. You've reminded me of the value of care, patience, and attention. And I notice it. I notice you." Elias felt his heart swell. For the first time, words seemed unnecessary, yet the meaning behind hers was clear. He realized that their bond had grown into something stronger than work or duty. It had become a quiet, meaningful connection, built on trust, respect, and recognition. "I'm glad," he said quietly. "I never imagined something so simple could mean so much." "It does," Rowan said, smiling softly. "And it always will. You've shown me more than you know. And I want you to know, I see you, truly, completely." Elias felt a warmth in his chest that went beyond pride or happiness. It was the deep satisfaction of being noticed, appreciated, and trusted by someone he admired. The connection they shared was quiet, tender, and unspoken, yet more powerful than words could express. As they finished the adjustments and packed away the tools, Elias realized that something remarkable had grown from a simple act of cleaning armor. What had begun as a small task had become a bridge between two very different lives, creating understanding, trust, and a quiet affection that neither had expected. Walking home through the castle corridors that evening, Elias felt lighter, braver, and more confident than ever before. He knew that the bond he had formed with Rowan would continue to grow, quietly and steadily, built on the foundations of care, respect, and attention. And somewhere nearby, Dame Rowan carried the same thought. The polished armor was no longer just a symbol of her strength or duty. It was a symbol of connection, trust, and the subtle, profound impact of small, thoughtful actions. In that quiet understanding, both Elias and Rowan realized something important, that care, attention, and respect, simple, genuine acts could create bonds far stronger than words, gestures, or grand declarations ever could. And in that realization they found the beginning of something lasting, meaningful, and quietly extraordinary. The castle, bustling and noisy around them, continued its routines, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place within its walls. But Elias and Rowan did not need recognition from anyone else. They had discovered something far more valuable: the understanding, respect, and trust between two people, born from the simplest of acts and strengthened through time, attention, and care. And so, the story that began with cleaning armor ended not with a proclamation, but with a quiet, unspoken bond, one that would endure, grow, and change both their lives forever.